Hello and welcome back to Practically Magic. I am your host, Courtney Pearl, Celtic folk witch, healer, priestess, whatever you'd like me to be today. But I have a guest. Tannaz is a registered psychotherapist qualifying. She's a life coach, breathwork coach, and host of her own podcast, Minutes on Growth. She was so wonderful to have me on her podcast not long ago. And so I am so excited to do this little switch where she gets to be on my podcast this time. So welcome, Tannaz.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to converse more together.
Yes. Yes. And when I was on your podcast, we were like talking, okay, what's some more stuff that we can bring up here? So you're kind of an expert or kind of focus on relationships, right? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But before we get to that, I'm going to pull a card because that's what we do here on Practically Magic. We start out our episode. What is the card that we need today? This might be for you specifically. It might be for our audience, whoever is listening at this moment in time. I am using the Luna Ethereal Visions deck, which I love because it's super sparkly and prismy, with a cool foil for those who can see on YouTube. And the card I have for us today is the Seven of Swords. I'm going to try to hold it up so we can see that. The Seven of Swords is actually perfect right now. I don't know where you're at in your cycles, but for me, this is a card that means the message here is you're holding too much and you got to figure out what you're going to put down. So he's kind of like holding a bunch of swords in his hands, and then he's got a couple on the ground and one in his other hand. And I always get this feeling of like, especially in this seasonal cycle, we're coming into the time that we're recording this is we're moving towards the summer solstice. And to me, that means a lot of like work energy. It's like work, lots of daylight, lots of the light is here the longest amount of time. So we're just going to get a lot done. But there comes a point where we're like, wow, have I said yes to too many things? Is it actually like a lot on my plate right now? And I need to kind of decipher what doesn't need to be there. Does that fit into anything that you've got going on right now?
100%. I was thinking about that today, actually, because I was looking at my calendar for this week and I'm like back-to-back sessions from, let's say, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And I was like, wow, this is a lot. I was like, this is a
It's
lot.
a
And
lot.
I'm juggling a lot. And I know myself well enough to know when I'm heading towards this regulation. And so no matter how proactive I am with my regulations, still when it's a lot on my plate, um, it can feel overwhelming. So I was really like, it's so interesting that you pulled this card because today morning I was thinking I need to do something about this schedule. It's not
Yeah,
sustainable.
100%. And we just tend to go into those, like the pendulum swings one way and then the pendulum swings too far the other way. And then we're like, energetically, what are we bringing in? Like, are we wanting to be that busy? Or then we're going, wait, now I'm way too busy. Um, I just had a healing session class this morning. We were kind of talking about like, uh, where do you need to align your path so that your boundaries can protect that, where your voice is the protection. Your voice gets to say, yes, I'm going to do that. Or someone invites you to something and says, will you do this for me? And you can go, no, actually, that doesn't align. That's not the path I'm in and where I'm headed and what I want and what I need right now and the purpose of this body, this soul, what I'm doing. So it's a good time to just self-reflect. Cards are telling us, like, take a moment, see what's aligned, what's in that space, what needs to clear out a little bit, give you some room for you and what you're aligning with. And actually, that comes very nicely because we're going to kind of transition into our topic today, but it may seem like it doesn't align, but actually it does, because we're talking about cycles and seasons. And it was just telling off the air, we were talking about how the healing cycles that I'm learning about in some of my emotional and energy healing sessions we were learning that the Beltane to summer solstice time of the year is a really great time to stop and look at relationships. It's a time to look at especially intimate or like your spouse, romantic relationships. It's a good time to look at that. So I've been doing a lot of journaling on that recently. Anyway, the questions are like, is your intimate relationship, with your partner, is it where you want it to be? Do you feel this and that? And I was starting to realize like, actually, I can see in the years past where I've swung my own pendulum from like major codependency patterns. And I think I've swung the pendulum too far the other way, where I was so codependent. I've been married since I was 19, and I've known my husband since I was 16. So you can probably decipher just how codependent we were in our earlier relationship. But certain things happen, and, struggles with addiction and things like that come into play. And then it's like, I swung my pendulum all the way from codependency patterns heavily to I need to not need him at all emotionally. Like I need to go all over here and be like, I meet all my own needs completely and totally. Right. So have you seen that? What's your experience with that?
100%. I think exactly as you said, being with someone for a prolonged period and starting from a very young age can bring that codependency patterns. And of course, our childhood comes into play. There's so many elements that make us who we are and act how we do. But, there's also a lot of narrative now and that I see on social media. So there's like one band that's all about like women should be super independent and hustle and boss lady and that. And then we see this whole other shift of extreme enmeshment and codependent traits that again are repeated patterns from childhood. So I've seen both, and of course the sweet spot is that interdependent relationship of I can lean on you and I can lean on me. I can co-regulate with you and I can self-regulate. So really finding that sweet spot is so powerful for both the individual and the relationship as a dynamic.
Yeah, and I've had for those listeners who've listened, we did a couple of episodes back in season 1 of codependency patterns and talked a lot about that. And I had another relationship coach, Brenda Cordolfer, that I know. She came on and we talked a lot about codependency patterns. And a lot of my work, I've been able to recognize, okay, what is codependency? How do we start to shift our mindset from that, which is how do I go to honor you, my partner, where you're at, and then separately honor me where I'm at and coexist in that space. And we're both honoring where we're at. I can say, you may not be where I'm at and I'm not where you're at, and that's okay. I'm not going to pressure you to do anything about that. I'm just going to see that and, see where we're both at. Because I have a lot of clients that come to me for healing work and they're like, my mom or my husband or my son, and it can be codependency patterns in all directions. But for argument's sake, we'll say in marriage, you have like I'm doing all this work on myself. I'm awakening and I'm learning so much and I'm growing so much, but my husband won't do anything and he won't do that work. And I'm leaving him behind and all of that. So it's kind of like being able to say, how can you, feel good about where you're at, what you're doing. And then also say, you've got your stuff. I'm not going to pick it up for you and work on it for you, but I'm also not going to pressure you and push you and nag you to get your stuff and get going and all of that. So I think back at my relationship personally, and me and my husband, we were like attached at the hip. I mean, we were, especially before kids, right? We went grocery shopping together. We rarely did anything. Even when he would go hang out with his friends were my friends. So I'd be like, wait, you're going to go hang out with your friends? What about me? If you go hang out with your friends, what friends am I supposed to hang out with? So it just was like, I mean, just, it felt to my young adult self, like, this is a great relationship. We're so close. It's only after the certain things happen, those ego deaths, these dark nights of the soul, addiction was introduced into the mix. And then it's like, wait, I can't always just depend on this other person to always be okay. Sometimes they're not okay. And then what happens to me? Do I crumble and fall? Do I fall apart? Or is my whole reality going to fall apart? So like I said, we swung that pendulum over the years. So I'd love to get your take on, if you were a person who went through something like that, you were very codependent, maybe tragedy strikes, maybe just life circumstances, whatever it is, trauma, for lack of a better word. So you got trauma happens, and then you swing that pendulum, you go, okay, I love you, but I'm going to like totally construct my own ego to the point where I don't need you for anything. Like you. So my husband and I are now at this point where I'm like, he likes to go watch Bigfoot documentaries and I'm not into it. So we'll just do separate things all the time. So I'm over here like, I don't need anything from you. I went and took a weaving class by myself, which I never would have done in my early adulthood, things like that. I'd like to come back to a more interdependent. So if you're way into independence, what would be some things you would suggest? Where do you go from there?
Well, first of all, thank you for vulnerably sharing. And I think it's important to note that when we're moving towards a super independent stance, there's a part of us that doesn't feel safe in depending on the other person. So there's a rupture in that safety. So, and that takes time. Of the same way that it took time to rupture it, it's going to take time to repair it. So both parties coming to the table and saying, okay, what can I do to earn your trust? And how can I lean in to you showing up? So that is the long-term strategy. Let's say that's the foundation. But if I love to do very practical work. My clients always say it's so refreshing to not hear, and how does that make you feel? So I'm like very like, okay, let's be very solution oriented and have the skills, because in my opinion, and really in my work, this past 8 years as a relationship coach, is relationships are 50% inner work, but are also 50% skills that many of us were not taught, were not modeled. And so, we got to figure it out. Now, God bless social media and all this information on the internet with content creators. So now we have more access to information about relational skills, but still for many, we haven't practiced it, we haven't embodied it. And so if we were going to look at it from a skill set, one practice I love to do with clients is break it down into 5 categories. So what are these 5 categories? Activities and practices and rituals that I want to do that I don't want to share with you. They're for me. They're for me and only me. I don't even want to share it. I don't want to talk about it with you, maybe even. It's just me. And then you have activities and practices that you have that you don't want to share with me. They're sacred to you. Then we have, so these are 2 categories. The third category is practices that I like, but I also want to share with you. It's important to me that you're a part of this experience of my world, this part of my world, and vice versa. His that he wants to share with you. And lastly, an area that we are both invested in, that we both like. So what this does is it gives me sense of self, you sense of self, and then there's parts of me that I want to share with you, parts of you that you want to share with me, and then the parts that are similar in nature. So for example, I'll break it down. For my partner, he loves to watch horror, action, all that category. That's an area I don't want to be involved in. He keeps it to himself, for example. But for me, I might like chick flicks and I want to share it with him. And he'll come and he'll be open to it. So if it's important to me that I share it with him, that compromise of, is this something? He'll be like, okay, I'll watch it with you once a month. Okay, maybe not every day. And then
Yeah.
part that I want to do, like I love to bake and I don't want to share that with him. That's for me. It's sacred for me. And then we both like to travel. really breaking it down, and I'm trying to simplify it because when we have things on paper, it helps us to see what are my areas, what are his areas, what are our shared areas, and really help us move in towards that interdependence. That's just one of the ways that we can do it, and I'll share more as we continue.
Yeah, I love that. That's like a real practical thing to do. You can sit down with a piece of paper, like a Venn diagram, I'm imagining, which is like my activities, your activities, and where do we meet in the middle? And I think in our codependent stages, we're like, I want to do everything together. I want to do, I think some of the run-ins that we have, and I'm just using my relationship as an example, so listeners can kind of understand. But um, my husband will oftentimes be like, I'm going to go water the garden or spend time out in the garden. I want you to come. I want you to do it with me. And I'll be like, oh, well, I don't really have a whole lot of interest in being out there in the garden, or I have, whatever. He'll say, I just want you to be out there. I just want you around me. So bring a book to read or do something, but I just want you there. Or he said that at one point, he was like, just come talk to me while I'm,
Hmm.
working in the garden. And that's something I love to do, probably much to the detriment of our relationship. I love to talk about everything. So I'll be like, oh, this is happening with this and this and so and so. I share everything. But that's something everyone should know about me. If you're telling me anything, my husband's going to know about it, because whether he's listening or not is another story. But there've been times where like I'll go out there and I'll be talking to him while he's gardening and he's not even really listening. And I'm like, why am I here? why do you need me here for this if you don't want to really interact with me? I think he just wants a body to be in his space. So I think even putting it down on paper and being like, is it necessary for me to be out there in the garden with you, or no? Maybe that one is a sacred just you. And he doesn't even realize that that's going to be a sacred just him activity until we decipher
Yeah,
that or go through that together. Yeah. So that's great.
exactly. And I think a part of that is also what are my needs, right? So what do I need in this relationship? And Esther Perel says something really, really, really powerful that, back in the day, there was this dynamic, these expectations in a relationship. So one provided, one was a stay-at-home partner. And so, the husband, traditionally speaking, was the primary provider, and that was his role. His role was to bring in the money, provide the house, pay the bills, and the woman to like cook, clean, raise the kids. Now we've seen a huge shift for many different reasons, but also the expectations have shifted in the sense that we now expect our partner to be everything all the time. You are now my lover. You are now my best friend. You are now my confidant. You are now my like so many different um, hats that every partner needs to wear in the relationship. And so we want to break that down. And this is where community comes into play very powerfully of looking at intimacy. So let's look at intimacy. And traditionally, we think of intimacy as physical or sexual, but I want to expand that definition to 6 different categories. So it's physical, which is non-sexual touch, hugging, kissing, holding hands, like kissing on the cheek, holding hands, playing footsie. Then we have sexual, which is, just sexual touch. In monogamous relationships, it's a non-negotiable, it's a priority, but in non-monogamous relationships, it might not be a priority. So then there's these two. And then we have emotional intimacy. Emotional intimacy is, do I feel safe to express my emotions to you without fear of judgment? So is this a safe space for me to express my feelings, my truth? We have intellectual
Mm-hmm.
intimacy, being intellectually stimulated by the other person, talking about different topics and um, aligned interests. We have spiritual intimacy. So it's the spiritual, the religious, but also values and beliefs discussing those and partaking in shared activities that relate to those. And lastly, experiential intimacy, experiencing the world together, whether it's traveling, it's checking out new restaurants, hobbies. So if we look at these 6 intimacy tanks, this is another great practical exercise to sit down and ask ourselves, first of all, what is a non-negotiable for me that my partner fills? Which one of these tanks is it a non-negotiable to my partner that fills? Of course, we want our partner to fill all 6, but it's too
Mm-hmm.
much to expect from someone to do it all the time. It's going to be overwhelming the other way around as well. If our partner expects us to do everything and be everything for them, at some point we're going to break down because we have other responsibilities. We have the outside world. We might have kids, households, so many different elements coming, at us at the same time. So sitting down and saying, okay, what is a non-negotiable? Let's say for me, hypothetically, emotional is a non-negotiable for me. Communicating that to my partner. This is really important to me. This is a need of mine that I need this relationship to meet. And then having the other person come and say, okay, for example, for me, experiential is very important. So having these conversations around what is really important for us in terms of our needs being met, and then asking ourselves, who else can fill these needs? So these tanks. So let's say for me, emotional, I have my partner, but then I have my mom, maybe I have my brother. And this is really important that we have as many people as we possibly can, safe people in these categories. Because what if my partner is my go-to person for emotional, but they had a really shitty day at work, or they're navigating a death in the family, a job loss, and just for, let's say, even like a short period of time or even a long period of time, they're unable to meet that need. Who else can we lean into for that support?
Yeah.
So having that understanding, game changer, removes so much pressure from the relationship.
Yeah. Even as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about my own experiences and just when we were in a more like codependent state, it felt like maybe possibly some contribution to that was that we didn't have enough of other people filling those roles. And we really did have the expectation, because it's young
Hmm.
love, you really do have this sort of unrealistic expectation, probably from the media, from movies, whatever it is, that's like your partner is going to be the everything for you. They're going to be your best friend and your lover, and you're this and you're that. And I remember feeling devastated kind of when we were first kind of in those first 10 years of marriage, and it was before kids, but it was like, uh, I knew that I wanted to travel. At some point, I wanted to see the world. I wanted to see different places. And my husband is like deathly afraid of flying. Only discovered that after we were married because he'd never flown before. So we tried to take a trip and he was like, that was the worst thing I've ever done. It was horrible. I never want to do that again. And I was like, wait, what? Never? So here I felt kind of almost like all these things I envisioned, all these places I wanted to go, it was going to be with him. I mean, for sure. Who else would I want to do all that stuff with? Nobody. There was nobody I would rather do it with. Now it's funny to me, we've been married 20 years, been through so much, but I think of how differently I feel about it now than when I did then. And he's even come around to, well, I actually would like to see more of the world. I'm just going to have to figure out a way to do it. And I have come around to, I'd love to go see lots of different places, but I don't need to do it just with you. I went and traveled with my aunt a couple years ago. We went to England together and I traveled with her because she wanted to go. And I thought, gosh, this is actually okay. And it's cheaper for us as a family because I'm only paying for me rather than the two of us. So all these things opened up and just having community, like you said, friends and family that I allow myself to be intimate with in those other ways. I can see places in my life where I have maybe stifled that subconsciously, just like, oh, I don't really want to get that close with a best friend or with a family member or things like that. I've kind of kept it at arm's length. And where that could have fulfilled those roles for me, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you shared that because, media does really play a big role in this of these perfect partner who's going to complete you narrative that we're sold, whether it's Disney or rom-coms. And then you go into the real world and you're like, okay, how can I attract the perfect partner if I'm not perfect, right? And no one is perfect. I tell all the couples I work with, I even in my own relationship, we enter into the relationship with baggage. Ultimately, the question is, can I tolerate this person's baggage? And do they have enough strengths that I can highlight? So do they have baggage and weaknesses that I can tolerate and strengths that I can love and magnify and expand on? That is the relationship that realistic, sustainable, because the perfect partner doesn't exist, the perfect relationship doesn't exist. There's also, this is one of the reasons this exists, this narrative, is because conflict is seen as such a scary thing. So when there is conflict, we're like, does this mean we're not compatible? Does this mean we're not meant to be together? And instead, if we can reframe conflict as a medium of connection, it can help us really understand each other better and build a deeper, more profound type of love. Honeymoon phase is great, but the acceptance phase, which is the fourth phase, is much more fulfilling if we can get to that
Mm.
part. So
Mm-hmm.
there's just so much that society and media has done to influence our perspective of relationships. But if we can make these shifts, and I'm not saying to tolerate abuse, I'm not saying to tolerate someone mistreating you, not at all. And that's why I'm saying baggage that you can tolerate. So you're coming to the surface and saying, okay, this is me and my trauma. And yes, I'm going to work on it. Of course, I'm going to take accountability for what I'm bringing in. But can you accept me as I am? We will change. Human beings are always changing and evolving and growing. But as I am right now, can you accept me? Because if not, then if you want to date my potential that I might never reach, by the way, you're
Mm-hmm.
always going to feel like your needs are not being met, and I'm always going to feel like I'm not good enough for you. It's a lose-lose situation.
Yeah, and what you're saying is actually really powerful for people who are single and looking and dating, is like, maybe it's a good idea to stop and just realize, what is those needs you're talking about, like, where are you looking for your partner to fulfill needs? Because if there's some on that list and some of those hats that they cannot fill, you want to make sure that, someone you're dating and you're potentially thinking about, like, oh, this could be a lifelong relationship, this could be a marriage, like, do they fill at least the ones you really put high on that list? Is like, are they, sexually intimacy, is that like an important part, and do they fill that? They it might not be high on the list. It might be like, yeah, of course I want to have a sexual intimate relationship, but I'd really rather them be very much emotionally intimate with me, and vulnerable, or like the willingness that someone has to work on things or to come to agreements about, rather than like, maybe their coping mechanism is avoidance, and that the more you have conflict, the more they avoid. That might be something to be like, well, this is the type of baggage I just can't deal with, right? So knowing that and just getting clear about that could be so helpful going into that. I haven't dated. Like I said, I met my husband when I was 16. He was the first boyfriend I ever had. And so I'm just imagining all of the people out in the dating world right now and like what that must be like. It's probably wild.
It is. It is. It's really tough. And I think it's really important for us to have these honest conversations and to raise awareness about these needs. And because sometimes there's a disconnection between our real needs and what society has conditioned us to think of as a need. And personality matters, your who you are and how you've been raised, they all play a role in the relationships that you will entertain and choose. And here's a really interesting point of it. We always choose subconsciously, familiar chaos over unfamiliar peace. So I'm going to repeat this. We choose
Mm.
familiar chaos over unfamiliar peace because familiar chaos is what is safe to us. Everything comes back to safety. What my body considers as safe doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy, but it's what is familiar to me. So if I'm noticing that, hey, I'm entertaining a bunch of men who are, players who are very avoidant, um, that's a moment for me to reflect on who modeled that avoidant behavior for me growing up, that I have normalized it, that now I entertain it because it feels familiar. And this is the 50% inner work part that I was talking about. So it's, yes, I
Hmm.
need to know these skills, these needs, and all of that, and how to communicate and how to fight fair and how to create different forms of intimacy. That's the skills. But then the inner work is, why am I entertaining this person, this dynamic? Why am I responding in this way? And being really, really curious without judgment or shame. We cannot judge or shame anyone, including ourselves, into changing. But if we sit long enough with these parts of us that we have suppressed, that we have name called, that we have really been harsh with, and give them a voice to express their truth, a lot of magic can happen.
Yeah. So, how would you recommend noticing or becoming self-aware of those patterns? Um, like, I'm thinking about uh those avoidant patterns, perhaps, like as an example. You're like, I'm always chasing their attention. I'm always chasing them down to talk to me or to resolve conflict or whatever it is. And then you go, oh, well, maybe that's something my parents, it was kind of the same thing that I was doing in my home growing up. But would you feel that first? Would you feel the uncomfortableness of that, or the like, I hate this. I don't like that I always have to engage in this way? Or yeah, what would you think would be a good way to monitor that?
So people will respond to it and monitor it differently. For some, it's going to be like, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? I'm just sick and tired of
Uh-huh.
this like dynamic, this roller coaster. But for some people, the roller coaster is the fun part. And that's what their nervous system is now accustomed to. So bring a healthy relationship into their life and they're going to find it extremely boring. And I've heard that feedback a lot. This is boring. That spark, that passion, that flame is missing. I need my twin flame and like all of the narrative. Um, so for some, it's, I'm tired of this. I'm drained. I'm noticing that I'm not as focused at work. It's impacting other areas of my life. For some, that realization comes when their health is influenced by it, impacted by it, their physical health. And for some, it's the narratives that they say, and someone like catches it on, like, oh, I'm just not lucky in love, or like people like me don't get to have that. And so, really sitting with that belief of,
Mm.
Wait, why do I have this belief that I'm not lucky in love? Or that people that look like me or think like me or act like me are always going to be alone, or these limiting beliefs of I'm going to die alone, I'm never going to find someone. The wound is where the light enters you is a beautiful poem by Rumi, and we get wounded in different ways. So for some, it's that yearning for something more. For some, it is the pain of what is happening. But all of these become an opportunity for us to reflect on what needs to change in me so that I can entertain a different type of love? What needs to change in me for me to realize that I am worthy and deserving of kind, secure, safe, healthy love? How am I contributing to this tango? It takes two to tango, right? To learn how to set better boundaries. Do I need to learn how to express myself in a way that's non-critical? Do I need to learn to take accountability for the impact of my actions, even if my intentions are pure? These are all communication skills the majority of us were not taught. So maybe I need to learn those skills, or maybe I need to just become aware of the maladaptive patterns that I'm repeating from my childhood. Because Dr. Gabor Mate says something really interesting. He's done phenomenal research on trauma, and he says that we tend to entertain partners that mimic a childhood relationship between self and caregiver in an attempt to change the outcome of that childhood relationship.
Okay.
Rewrite history. And so that's when we kind of go into this Bob the Builder mode of falling in love with potential, trying to fix, trying to change, project management. All of that comes to the surface.
Well, that makes so much sense. Yeah. And in the work that I do energetically with people with it, like inner child work, that makes so much sense because a lot of times we're bringing in the role play part, we're bringing in, mom or dad or who was kind of the key player here. And what was it that your, let's say, 7-year-old self needed? What do they need to hear from them? And it's so interesting to correspond that with like the oxytocin, the the chemical brain as it was forming. What were the chemicals that created those neural pathways? How do we get those needs met? Is like, that's going to correspond with love. It's going to be like, and even dopamine, the safety element you're talking about, which is like, I need to make sure I feel certain and safe in this relationship. Which, looking at my own trauma in our relationship, is, when things kind of fell apart, when addiction was kind of in the mix there, and it was recovering from addiction and all the messy stuff that happens in that place, was sort of a like, oh, I totally depended on this person, like maybe more than I should have. But that was my dopamine fix, was like, I completely and 100% believed that they were going to be there to meet all my needs. I felt completely safe. And then I didn't all of a sudden. So it's like that floor came out from under me kind of feeling. And it's this whole new cycle of, how do I rebuild that? What does it look like now? So you're getting that correspondence to that inner child of like, how did I get that feeling when I was growing up? How did I get that feeling from caregivers? How did I interact with that in that space too? So it's interesting because I'll just bring in the fact that also we did our birth chart readings as a couple and did like a relationship themed birth chart reading thing. And he's a Scorpio, and so is my mom, a sun sign. And so I'm like, interesting how that shows up, that like the way that I got love, or the way that I saw that relationship, I sought out a person who also interacts in that same way, not always comfortable ways. If anybody knows what a Scorpio is like, that's not always what a Pisces really, really needs. Or, as it turns out, a Leo moon sign like myself, Cambria, who did our, she's another guest on the podcast in earlier season, so listeners will know Cambria Davis, but she did our chart reading, and she said, as a Leo moon, you need like paparazzi treatment. She was telling my husband, like, you gotta like adore her. You've got to obsess over her. You gotta like take lots of pictures of her, tell her how amazing she is. She likes praise. And it was so funny because he was like, as a Scorpio, I don't really feel like that comes naturally to me. And, it just are like where those compatibilities don't necessarily line up. It's just interesting, something to think about.
I love that you shared that. Sorry. But as
Yeah.
you were sharing that, I was thinking of this concept called love maps. That it's a concept coined by the Gottman Institute, the leading institute on relationships. And Dr. John Gottman always says, you want to give your partner a map to how you'd like to be loved. Set them up for success, right? So even in this birth chart, as you were sharing that relationship chart, it's a map of, hey, listen, this is how I can be loved. And I don't want to play games like this. Playing games, he should know. No, no one is a mind reader, people. I'm going to repeat this. No one is a mind reader. No one can read your mind because also there's so many differences in like expectations and how we like to be loved and how we like to feel needed and appreciated and valued. There's so many differences. Like for me, if I'm feeling tense, I just want you to sit there. For someone else, it's I want you to talk to me or I want you to hug me. And so if I don't express that need and let's say my partner is he loves physical touch and I like to just be in company, not really a touchy person based on my understanding of how I like to be loved and caressed and like taken care for, I would just sit next to my partner. In my mind, I'm thinking, oh, he must feel so loved right now that I'm sitting next to him. And
Yeah.
he's thinking, oh my God, does she not love me? Why won't she hug me? And if we just expect the other person to know, that's where disconnection happens. And still, like, this is a
Mm,
person that I've also known for 13 years, but I don't make assumptions. And because I really say like curiosity saves relationships, assumptions break them. If I just assume
mm,
he's the same person he was 13 years ago, then I'm not allowing room for change and his growth and his evolution. So you also want to be like curious,
yeah.
like, hey, like, how would you like to be loved right now? How can I help you? How can I support you right now? But really speaking up about it is so important and giving your partner that map. Hello, here you are. I'm setting you up for success. I'm setting us up for success. Can be really, really
Yeah.
powerful, however you choose to do that.
Okay. And then that brings me to maybe what I'd like, and again, social media has all of these great things, sometimes not so great things. So deciphering what you're really listening to is a good idea. But um, the bids for connection, that seems to be like a real hot button item. And I made a TikTok video yesterday just for fun, where I was like, hey, I told my husband I wanted to sit on the porch and drink coffee and have breakfast because it was Memorial Day. We had the day off. We could, just chill. And I said, so this is what he chose to do. And I just panned the camera over and he's mowing the lawn. Cause I was like, hey, let's sit on the porch. Let's do this. And my husband, he's just like ADHD, like whatever. He's like, oh, the lawn needs to be mowed. I better like go do that right now. So he's out mowing the lawn. I was just kind of making it funny, like, so this is what he's doing. And then I was over there like sneezing with allergies because the lawn was mowing and I'm sitting on the porch. I did get a lot of feedback and comments and things that I don't typically get on social media. And I was like, okay, relax, guys. It was a joke. But but that's a good topic to bring up is like, what if bids for connection like that are not always reciprocated in the way that you expect, or what is some tips that you would have of what you can do when talking about that with your partner?
Yeah, I mean, step one is to be aware of what bids for connection are. So, bid for connection is your attempt to connect with the other partner, and the partner can respond in three ways. So let's use an example. We're driving, and I see beautiful clouds, and I go like, "Babe, look at those clouds." Now my partner has three ways to respond to it. Either he'll look at the clouds and be like, "Yeah, they're so nice," so he's leaning into my bid. Or he'll continue to, let's say he's on his phone and I'm driving. He'll continue to be on his phone. So he's completely ignored that bit. Or he'll be like, don't you see I'm on my phone messaging? He'll respond harshly to the bid. So we really want to be conscious of when it is that our partner is bidding for connection and how we're responding to that bid. Now, there's a lot of, again, statistics by the Gottman Institute, but there is a magic ratio, and the magic ratio is 5 to 1, meaning for every one negative interaction or rupture, we want to have 5 positive ones to balance the scales. That's what we need. We need 5 to 1. So if I
Mhm.
have one bid that I dismissed, I need to have 5 bids where I'm tuning into that bid. And that's when relationships feel fair. I really highly recommend, people are very analytical. I highly recommend looking into the Gottman Institute's research because they kind of bring it down to numbers and percentage, and they've been doing it for many, many decades. So whether you're analytical or you're more on the feeling side, their work resonates. So we want to be conscious of that is step two of what does that ratio look like in our relationship, the piggy bank, the positive versus the negative, what we're depositing versus what we're taking out. Does this balance, is there a balance? And then it's the third is, how do I communicate it in a non-critical way? So instead of saying, you're so selfish, you're so inconsiderate, which is an attack on the person's character, we shift the focus to the problem. What is the problem? The problem is that you wanted to connect with your partner in that moment, and that connection didn't take place. When I shift to attacking that person's character, I'm being critical. Natural response is the person gets defensive. Now, they'll get defensive in two ways. They'll either attack you back, I'm inconsiderate, have you seen yourself? Or they'll go into over-explaining mode. Don't you see? I've had such a long day. I've been like answering emails and I have so much on my plate. And they'll go into like, whether it's like victimhood or, oh, poor me, I'm like such a martyr in this relationship, or over explaining. However that defensiveness looks like, it's not going to solve the problem. They're going to ping pong each other until like World War III happens between them. So criticism and defensiveness, they ping pong. Now, what would be the antidote of that? For criticism, instead of criticizing that person's character, it's a very beautiful formula. It's called gentle startup. When X happens, I feel Y, I need Z. When I bring up, when I'm trying to connect with you and I'm mentioning the clouds and you don't respond to that, I feel so overlooked. I feel so unimportant. I feel so abandoned. Your feelings are valid too. So express how it makes you feel. I need us
Yeah.
to be more intentional with our connection. So that becomes the antidote of criticism. The antidote of defensiveness is taking accountability. I could see how my actions, made you feel that way. I can see how that can be frustrating. I can see how that can be challenging. I apologize. I take accountability. It's like water on fire from both sides. The person's being critical to lean into gentle startup, and the person who's being defensive to lean into accountability and validation.
Awesome. Yeah. And that like takes that I feel statement that most people have practiced or know about into like, here's an even deeper way to go with this. This is how I feel. This is why.
And this
And
is what I need.
this is what I need. Exactly. So I did just recently do a class with Tiffany Lasik. She was talking about shame, and she said defensiveness is because of shame. That like when people get defensive, it's because inwardly or subconsciously they do feel like something is wrong with them and they need to defend themselves in some way. So even avoidance is a defensive program, but that the opposite of that, when you don't have defensiveness in the way, it's just boundaries. So I could see even just like I'm being brought or, with a problem, or like someone's bringing to me, like, I don't like the way this just happened. I don't like the way that you just behaved, whatever it is. That if we would have a tendency to go to defensiveness, like, oh, now I need to like gear up and to be defensive about what I'm being told I am, I'm inconsiderate. I'm going to prove that I'm not, because I'm going to, and then there's some part of you that believes maybe there is something wrong with me. So there's shame. On the other side of that, it could be, well, here's what I will do. Like setting a boundary. I will do this instead of this. This is where I feel comfortable with interacting or being able to help meet those needs that you have. So I could see how that would work out that way. And hopefully that's how it works out with people. I also wanted to point out that this is super helpful with relationships with kids, because in child development, that's my realm where, I was a teacher, early childhood development. And, they always say that like ratio, you were talking about 5-to-1 bids for connection. It's a similar thing with kids. A lot of times they're giving you a bid for connection and you might brush it off because you're like, I'm busy. I have something I'm doing right now. Don't, don't come to mommy with that right now. I'm whatever it is. And being like, for every time you have to correct a behavior with a child or you have to do something, you want to balance it. And I think it's like 7-1. We try to aspire to 4-1, but I think 5-1 would be a great, a great goal to say like, okay, I had to brush them off or I had to correct their behavior in some way. And now I get to figure out ways that I can connect in positive ways with them, building a relationship with my child that's connection over consequence. I could see that playing out really well for parents as well, your relationships.
Connection over consequence. I love that. And it's the same with, with partners too. If a couple comes to me and they're like, we never fight, I'm like, that's never a good sign. It just means that one of you is like abandoning your needs majorly. So how can we reframe the way you see conflict and turn conflict into a medium of connection?
Yes. There's a family story, my husband's side of the family, that the grandfather and the grandmother never fought, that if they ever had conflict, they would just hold hands and walk around the block. And by the time they got back, the problem would be solved, and they never fought, never, ever fought. And I was like, okay. I always wonder, I wanted to ask grandma, I've asked her before, like, so this is the family story. What happened on those walks? What do I need to know? Like, give me some wisdom here. And, I suspect that maybe somebody was always getting their needs met and someone was maybe not always getting their needs met, but that's all, hearsay and will be lost to the family folklore forever, perhaps.
But also, it's actually, when couples are dysregulated, it's actually interesting to bring that up because there's some science to it. When we get stressed, or there's tension, or there's a conflict, or there's trauma, the prefrontal cortex, which is, the rational mind, the mind for rational thinking, emotional regulation, communication, problem solving, that goes offline. And instead, the amygdala, which is the fear center, that takes over. Now, science is showing us we need at least a minimum of 20 minutes to regulate the emotion and to process the physiological flooding that is happening in our body. Going for that walk can be really helpful because it helps us regulate. Now we're going back to that regulated baseline, and we're more open to resolving and navigating it and figuring it out. So it's very helpful to go on that walk for 20
So
minutes.
that might be the answer for a lot of people. Get into conflict, just go for a walk.
Yes.
I think holding hands is part of the trick there. I'm not sure.
Yeah. The
People
co-regulation.
should experiment with that. Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, so before we wrap this up, was there anything else that we just did not cover you want to make sure that everybody gets some clarity about?
No, I think we covered so much, but just one thing you mentioned at the beginning is like success and failure of a relationship. And I think for so long we have determined the success of a relationship by the longevity of it. And as a result, some people stay in unhealthy, unsafe dynamics because of it, right? So they either I've invested a lot of time in it, or I don't want to be seen as someone who's giving up too fast. So, and when I'm talking about unsafe and unhealthy dynamics, I'm not talking about differences and conflict. I'm talking about any dynamic that has abuse present in it, whether it's emotional, verbal, physical, sexual abuse. So I want to kind of take that narrative away of longevity is success and more of like the safety element of the relationship being a predictor of that success. How safe does this dynamic feel? And the depth of that safety and the willingness of both parties to be contributing to that sensation of safety on a consistent basis.
Perfect. Thank you so much for bringing that up too. Yeah. I know that like when times were rocky for me, there was an element of like, if this marriage were to end, you know, I was faced with that. What was my core belief about that? Because part of me did feel like it would have been a failure. And I had to redefine what that was. And then even just friends and loved ones I've had that have ended their marriage, you know, I didn't feel that I had any judgment towards them, towards what they chose to do. But after going through an experience where essentially the marriage I was in ended and a new one began, even if it was the same marriage,
Yeah.
I had an opportunity to relook at that myself and say, wow, there really is a lot of different complex things that happen, and that building something safe is really kind of the key there. So I'm glad that you said that, brought that up. So before we end today, I just want to give you an opportunity. So for those of you who are listening who want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
So on my website, Minutes on Growth, so ON and then growth, you'll find a lot of resources on my website. There are master classes that you can watch on intimacy, on proactive communication. I'm on all social media platforms under the same name, Minutes on Growth, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I love to create educational content. And my podcast, again, Minutes on Growth. So it's really just Minutes on Growth everywhere.
The whole
And
brand
yeah,
to
the
just
whole
find
brand is
you.
just
Good. Yes. And we'll make sure that there's links in the show notes as well, so people can find you there. And, you know, if you're looking for her, you can come to this episode of Practically Magick, where we'll have this on YouTube and the Practically Magick website and all of the platforms that we release on as well. So, and then go check out all of the episodes, Minutes on Growth. So many. I mean, I'm just scrolling through and like, you can find something about anything that you might want to know about. So it's a great resource for lots of things, all things healing. And of course, you can find us Practically-Magick, Magick with a CK.com. Our sponsors, Prism Healing, that's my business. I do emotional and energy healing work and card readings as well. We will be raising prices actually come July and changing a little bit of our services and offerings at Prism Healing. So you're going to want to check it out, prism-healing.com. I would like to just take a moment to thank our network, Ride the Wave Media, Just Blaine, who is our producer and produces all of these fabulous episodes that we have. We're getting ready to close out season 2. And then we are gearing up for what's to come next on season 3 of Practically Magick when we come back. So that's going to be really exciting. We have lots of great ideas on what we're going to be doing. And I'd like to thank one more sponsor, Sunshine Community. Thank you so much for being a community here locally to help women in business and women who feel isolated and alone, creating a community for them. So that should be just about it. Thank you so much again, Tannaz, for coming on and for the great discussion. And I know my relationship is improved already just having listened to you.
Thank you, Courtney, for
So
having
go
me on.
make magic, witches and wizards.